Hello and welcome to the third post on this channel. I would say it's the Pants on Fire podcast, but it really isn't. Due to a couple of circumstances, including but not limited to none of my friends being available and there being no SD card in the microphone box, so I had to steal it from a camera. This isn't going to be a typical Pants on Fire game show podcast. Unfortunately, I had a fun one lined up where I went through some really obscure and strange Marvel characters, but that'll have to get shelved for a while. Instead, I figured I'd take a crack at doing something a bit more YouTubery than podcasty because it seemed like fun. I have a script I wrote over the summer for a YouTube video I always wanted to make, but never got the opportunity. Maybe I still will. Because I was reading a lot about it and I was very passionate about it. I love video games and I think they're very interesting. There's no game I like more than Pokemon, and the mechanics of those games have always fascinated me. So I wrote an entire 40-page script over the summer exploring the mechanics and intricacies of those types and how they were developed back in 1989 to 1996 for the first generation 1 of Pokemon. So I figured I would just read an excerpt of that for like 20 minutes. I think it'd be interesting, and it's something I've always wanted to do, and I was really hoping to learn some skills to make this possible from this class, and I'd like to say I have, so I will put that to the test. So, without further ado, this is a pseudo video essay, I suppose, on Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow type mechanics. Pokemon is pretty cool. Never have I felt a series infect my brain and take a hold the way I think about designing concepts the way Pokemon has. And I've liked a lot of things. Being the franchise that has taken the most time out of my life of any of the variety of hobbies and interests I've collected, it is no wonder that Pokemon feeds that itch the most. It should be no surprise that because of this, I find a true love in Generation 1. While not my favorite by any means, I have always been completely enamored and fascinated with its raw, messy simplicity and the way it sort of lets you explore under the hood of its development. It has a bite to it that you don't find in any other game after it, a game that casually mentions South America or Stand By Me or whatever oddities that it makes it feel like. The game that most feels at ease, referencing and homaging all of the things the developers loved when they grew up, whether it be Ultraman or a variety of Super Sentai or pop culture or American superheroes. Gen 1, in its 6-year development, somehow does not feel effortlessly curated. It's sometimes hard to reason that this is a truly small passion project with a small-time development team, considering how hard and easily it took over the world when it came out, one whose genius came in small suggestions and concepts not yet delivered on a technology so simple it can be replicated on a TI-84 calculator. It should only be natural, then, that in this franchise, there has been a surplus of themes, mechanics, and ideas that have been thoroughly picked apart and analyzed. In fact, you could probably find a video on basically anything about this series on YouTube. But through all the deep exploration and understanding, one aspect of Pokemon, the one I personally find most fascinating in a game design aspect, has never really been deeply explored. And while I may not be the one best suited for it, or the one who can provide the most in-depth analysis, I want to try. So let's talk about Pokemon types in Generation 1 and why they're pretty cool. But first, a quick generalist breakdown on this part of Pokemon that makes them so personable. The typing of a Pokemon is really the single biggest definer of its personality in a gameplay sense. In an essence, it boils down to the truest essence of game design and speaks to what using them is likely going to convey. A fighting type immediately calls a powerhouse of brute strength with a high attack stat and that is hard to defend against, while a steel type, though not in this generation, is likely to be sturdy, tough son of a bitch that's going to take time to whittle down. Pokemon is not a basic franchise in the sense that all 1,000 plus of its monsters will fit into this, of course, Countless forms of subversion will appear as the series expands. Takes everyone's favorite Wobbuffet, whose psychic type might invoke a powerful, mindful powerhouse, but instead is truly a simple punching bag built around taking damage and dishing it right back out through unique gameplay. Gen 1, however, plays its typing roles rather straight, as expected of a first entry. Let's discuss some common criticisms with the classic Pokemon type systems that help establish some, but far from all, strangeness, and why it's not that strange in the macro sense. In the most original form, Pokemon types are split between physical and special. In Generation 1, there are 15 of these types, with 8 being physical and 7 being special. These include normal, flying, bug, poison, fighting, rock, ground, and ghost for physical, and water, grass, fire, electric, psychic, ice, and dragon for special. All moves of a type are either physical or special, depending on which type it is, if they do damage. And now that all of this basic stuff is out of the way, let's discuss what this real section is for. In early generations of Pokemon types, and especially strong stab moves are a privilege, not a right. People often bemoan the principle. It certainly is not fun when, for example, you as a trainer wish to use Rhydon, a powerful ground rock Pokemon, but unfortunately, as you may come to find, Rhydon does not learn a single same-type attack bonus move by level up, only Earthquake, Dig, and Rock Slide by TM, a very rare and precious one-use item that you may have already used. This is no doubt frustrating, yes, but Rhydon's typing does have benefit outside of just raw power. Ground gives Rhydon an immunity to Electric, a powerful offensive type, and a resistance to Rock and Poison. Rock means you're resistant to Normal, an incredibly common move type and a very precious resource in Gen 1, Fire, Flying, and Poison. That is not at all a terrible defensive profile on paper, and when combined with the shared weakness to Grass and Water of both types, it grants Rhydon a defined existence and flavor even without throwing out strong Earthquakes. Arguably, the best example, though, is Kingler. With a measly 50 special stat and a typing of pure water, Kingler is far from the strongest option to be throwing out Surfs or its signature Crab Hammer. But with the same type attack bonus, Kingler's Surf will still be okay enough as a button to click. But there are more than enough strong water special abusers in Generation 1. What really gives Kingler its flair is the monster physical stat it has, tied second highest in the game, with access to Swords Dance and the one-hit KO move Guillotine at level 25, the Pokemon with the lowest level access to a move like this. Kingler's water type instead becomes its primary supportive tool, one it can leverage its resists to set up with, and one that lets it muscle through the only normal resist in the game, Rock, and also deal with the only ghost type in the game. Here, while not a major beacon of diversity like, say, Wobbuffet might be, Generation 1 shows itself playful in the roles a type can serve. It may surprise a more casual fan that the types were not part of Pokemon design process from the start. Instead, it only appears around year 3 of the game's 6-year development cycle, as cataloged by the research of the wonderful website The Helix Chamber, which will be constantly referenced in this discussion. Classic monsters such as Nidoking, Exeggutor, and Voltorb were typed retroactively, though most were designed with the type mechanic in mind. I bring this to mind because it helps inform how types are designed and expressed in the game, not as a methodical set-in-stone concept, but as a flexible, ever-changing system whose quirks and oddities come from the shifting needs of an ever-evolving game. Pun intended. I think it's best to start exactly where Gen 1 does, Pallet Town. Frankly, I feel the need to discuss Pallet Town out of place to start, but because it introduces you to the most important Pokemon in the game, the starter. Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle are an iconic trio of monsters that to grant the player immediate access to. They are all very cute, but the first thing I want to tackle with them is the elements that define their existence. Grass, Fire, Water is a trio that feels as natural to access now as it does to breathe, but in the language of video games, it's actually a rather odd. Take an example, Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy's primary elements in a combat are a trio of fire, electric, and ice. Dragon Quest boasts the same, though both use wind rather prominently as well, and so does Earthbound. This is primarily inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, I believe, and has now cemented itself in video game lexicon as the basic trio of type attacks. I bring this up because it makes the choices here all the more interesting. You can really feel the relics of the classic type trio throughout the game. The legendary birds are fire, ice, electric, as do a trio of late-game exclusive monsters in the game, Electabuzz, Magmar, and Jinx. The move Tri-Attack hits the opponent with a deluge of elemental effects, burning, freezing, or paralyzing, the fire, electric, and ice statuses. And of course, there's Eevee, whose iconic evolutions are fire, electric, and water, Well, that's certainly strange, isn't it? Vaporeon is a water type. With 3 separate trios that hold this set of types and only one away from completing it, it certainly makes me wonder, long before I became educated enough to discuss, why is this? That leads the perfect segue into the first type, water. It appears, at least through research done by people smarter than I, that water and ice seem to have originally been one type. Their moves are placed together in a move list. 3 separate lines both use this typing, Dewgong, Cloyster, and Lapras, and Ice is rather late in the type index, being the last special type added before Dragon. The Ice type itself is very interesting, but let's focus how it plays into water instead. Water is kind of a boring type, isn't it? It's the second most common type, Poison beats it by 1, and a large chunk of the roster is monotype by nature of water effectively applying to any fauna that inhabits the water. That's not to say it's bad or poorly designed. Instead, water exists as a jack-of-all-trades type. It has 2 weaknesses and 2 resistances, and it's also strong against 3 offensive-leaning types, making it a reliable defensive type while also dishing out impressive firepower. Water, in this way, seems to have inherited most of the general utility likely found in the proto-ice water type, being very splashable and not as distinctly specialized as ice. Unlike other types, however, which are defined by status effects and other game mechanics, fire and burn, fighting and recoil, ice and freeze, water is more generalist in nature and has some moves that can flinch, some moves that confuse, but nothing that flashy. As a first option to the player, it serves as an effective solid baseline and continues to be that throughout the game. In comparison, fire is more flashy but a bit less interesting under the hood. The only surviving member of the original type trio, Fire doesn't really have anything distinctly Pokemon about it just yet. It is an offensively specialized type, defined by its ability to cripple physically leaning mons and burn. Fire is also rather simple looking as a type chart. Fire is strong against 3 types, grass, bug, and ice, and weak to 3 as well, water, ground, and rock. A matchup list that does not inspire major aspirations. Instead, the Ember monsters of this game are instead amplified by how exclusive the fire type is. I mentioned earlier that much of water is pure water, but that is more so reflected by the sheer scope of how many water types are present. Fire is a majority monotype set as well, the only exceptions being Charizard and Moltres, a starter and legendary respectively. The rest of the fire roster is just fire, and incredibly rare. Of the 7 fire lines in the game, 1 is a starter, 1 is a legendary, Flareon is an evolution from a one-a-game gift Pokemon, and 3 of them are version exclusive. This leaves Rapidash as the only fire type in the game to be repeatedly obtainable in both games. This makes fire an elusive type, one you have to be special to embody. I find this interesting because it puts the player who picks Charmander at an inherent advantage resource-wise. But cleverly, the game understands this, and Charmander player will be faced with a boss, a dungeon, and then another boss that all rocks Charmander's world, punishment for wisely picking the rarest possible option. Clever stuff. The final of the original trio set, Grass feels very unlike a starting option for a game like this, in part because it was a seemingly pretty late choice. Looking at the index order and Pokemon added to the game, the Bulbasaur line is added rather late, though admittedly before both the Charmander and Squirtle lines, and the version-exclusive Oddish and Bellsprout are the final Pokemon in the list. The good folks over at the Helix Chamber theorized the addition of these 2 lines was to bolster the Grass roster for the game after upgrading the type's poster evolution line, the Bulbasaur line, to a starter, removing it from the game's general pool. I'm inclined to agree with this hypothesis, as Grass, unlike Fire and Water, is rather specialized. Both Fire and Water are designed in differing but straightforward ways. They're offensively leaning types that can hit hard and have limited weaknesses. Fire holds 3, but we'll discuss the strangeness of Rock and Ground later. This makes both suitable to handle most fights in the game with relative ease, and even Charizard is designed to eliminate a weakness Fire holds, making it an even stronger Swiss Army knife design. But Bulbasaur, and by extension its entire type, is far, far more specialized. The biggest tell to this is the type chart. Grass is weak to a whopping 5 types and resisted by a staggering 6. This makes Grass the type with the single most weaknesses in the game. Steel doesn't exist yet, so Rock will later tie it, and the single most resisted type in the game, later tied by Bug. For a starter type, Grass feels, well, kinda pathetic, at least looking at it on this level. Offensively, it does not fare all that impressively, strong against 3 types and resisted by 4. Credit to the grass type, the 4 resistances it does have are rather respectable, with water, electric, and ground all being coveted resistances and powerful types on their own. But what does the grass type lack in general battle application? It gains credit in the second layer of Pokemon battle design, status. Grass is arguably the most supportively designed type in the franchise, only rivaled by Steel, and it's sewn into the design language and flavor of every grass Pokemon in the game. This is best explained by the trio of early game evil, the powder moves. Every single grass type in Generation 1 is granted access to at least 2 of Stun Spore, Poison Powder, and Sleep Powder. The exception is Paris, who is granted the far superior Spore over Sleep Powder. And most get all 3. Anyone who has played Generation 1 OU knows the true terror of facing a full health Exeggutor who has yet to reveal how it can ruin a potential sweep through clicking a status move you did not expect. Grass is also granted the flavor of being a type based on draining energy. 3 of the 6 offensive grass moves drain HP from the opponent and regain your own, paired with a status move, Leech Seed, which grants the grass type a unique defining personality that isn't seen in the other 2 types so far. Far more offensive, but far less supportive. Fire has 0 non-damaging moves in Gen 1, and the only supportive move for water is Withdraw, a move that boosts your defense, and is really only here because turtles and clams exist. Furthermore, while the strongest attacks of the elemental types such as Fire Blast, Hydro Pump, and Thunder all balance their high damage with lower accuracy, the ultimate grass attack in the game, Solar Beam, is a completely accurate attack, instead requiring a 2-turn charge, another trade-off that it reads as a type as a tricky, methodical type. It is in this way that I find the design a bit in contrast to how the game presents the type story-wise. Generation 1 almost folds over backwards to provide Bulbasaur an easy path to the mid-game, beating the first 2 gym leaders as well as resisting Surge before it struggles a bit in the later game. It is a minor critique, and I must applaud the team for cleverly forming 3 levels of difficulty curves through the choice of the player's ace, but I did want to note it. The player can take their newfound companion into the wilds of Route 1. And Route 1 sure is a terror, serving as a humble introduction to the secret king of Generation 1, the normal type. I think the normal type often gets overlooked in comparison to its 17 sisters. Certainly, it is far and away the least flashy. However humble it looks, though, it certainly isn't weak. The normal type is instead blessed with some of the best traits to grant a Pokemon. Only one type, Rock for now, resists the normal type. Only one is strong against it, which is Fighting, and Ghost types are immune to it. Though in a fun twist, Normal is also immune to Ghost, its only defensive interaction in the game. Certainly, this paints a picture of a near interactionless type, the typeless filler for monsters not defining enough to earn an elemental or otherwise descriptive title. However, I am inclined to disagree with this title of the normal type. I feel it doesn't quite do justice to the cleverness it has under the hood. Instead, let's analyze how Normal plays into the game around it. Normal moves are broadly applicable to any Pokemon in the game. A Pokemon with a large body can likely learn Strength, a Pokemon with sharp teeth can learn Bite, and every fully evolved Pokemon in the game can learn Hyper Beam with the exception of Ditto. In that vein, many of the game's strongest attacks are normal. Hyper Beam is mentioned, Double Edge, Skull Bash, and the all-or-nothing explosive finale's Self-Destruct and Explosion. Thanks to the same type of attack bonus system, this means that normal types are often hitting very, very hard. This is only completed by the fact that normal type Pokemon are often granted some, frankly, insane coverage options. Tauros can learn Blizzard, Raticate can learn Thunder, Clefable is granted Psychic, and the list goes on. These 2 facts make facing a properly kitted normal type incredibly scary. The terror of the iconic Generation 1's Big 3 says it all, with Chansey's monster HP and strong special stat enabling a powerful wall and respectable blizzards, Snorlax's monster attack and access to self-destruct almost promising to kill a game piece at any time, and Tauros' high speed and attack able to run through just about anything with a little chip. The normal type is powerful. It's not to be respected. The shift from its namesake is only further compounded by the types of designs and game function granted to the normal type. That is to say, it's really the only type allowed to experiment with what a Pokemon can do, at least in Generation 1. In this design space, you see normal used for several designs and monsters that are not so much meant for pure offensive battle, but to express unique gameplay mechanics and systems. The aforementioned Chansey, for example, makes an excellent, powerful supporting Pokemon, but is also designed to be a grand reward for hunting in the Safari Zone. Its 1% chance encounter rate and the Japanese name of Lucky make it pretty obvious. Ditto 2 is a prime example, being a classic mimic. Eevee is used to explore the possibilities of evolution, both in being the only Pokemon to change its type completely when evolving, but also to be the only Pokemon in Generation 1 with branching paths of evolution. The type is used to teach static encounters with Snorlax, or as a prize for gambling in Porygon. Indeed, the normal type is often breaking away from the player's expectations, a far evolution from Route 1's Rattata and its rootmate Pidgey. The clever listener may have realized I have intentionally avoided discussing half of the normal type roster in Generation 1. That indeed was a trick, a setup. I have deceived you to form my ideal narrative. Yes, the evolutionary lines of Pidgey, Spearow, Farfetch'd, and Doduo are examples of arguably the most defining and storied dual typing in Pokemon history. For the first 10 plus years or so, pairing normal with anything at a time was impeccably rare, limited only to Girafarig, a Pokemon with a history so storied and complex it's impossible to get into now, and Bibarel. To stop beating around the bush, the normal flying type pairing represents a unique piece of development storytelling for the complementary type of flying. The flying type is a uniquely odd type in the series for a few notable reasons. First off, every flying type Pokemon in the game was dual type or paired with another. This is not necessarily strange. Ice, Rock, and Ghost all share this trait, creating a feeling of complementary type and design, but where Rock and Ghost gained monotype representatives in Generation 2, and Ice had to wait until Generation 3, Flying did not gain a single monotype Pokemon until Generation 5. Even now, nearly 30 years after the franchise began, only 3 monsters have ever been granted the single most elusive form of type representation in the game. I step out of the realm of 1996 to explain this baffling phenomenon, specifically to contextualize in more broad strokes the uniqueness of normal flying. How a dual type came to be the primary design language that a monotype should have covered cleanly. Because yes, all normal flyings in Generation 1 are very much normal. Pidgey is not notably spectacular in any way, or say far-fetched compared to a grander Charizard or Zapdos, but Caterpie is rather normal for a bug. Goldeen is a normal fish, if I had to argue, and I don't fault the designers for not making Psyduck part normal, or for Doduo being part normal. I simply bring it up as a question and an idea. Because there is an answer to this oddity, or why only one type is paired with normal for more consistently for 10 plus years, why few monotypes exist, and more strangeness if you dig even deeper. Most Pokemon fans, however seasoned, likely can guess the answer, and it's that flying is not just one type, but two, possessed by a ghost of Generation 1, a ghost that looms over flying type for all it is and does, the bird type. Bird is arguably the most iconic form of cut content in the Pokemon franchise. Iconically the type assigned to Missing No, I think its role in the flying type's form in Generation 1 is not only essential to understanding it, but also rather confusing. First, I think it's important to decipher what Pokemon were bird and what would be proto-flying. This list is pretty simple, frankly. Pidgey, Spearow, Doduo, and Farfetch'd, as well as evolutions, as well as the legendary birds, were all certainly bird type, which is a bit obvious. Butterfree, Scyther, Charizard, Zubat, Golbat, Dragonite, and Gyarados were all likely proto-flying. This leaves Aerodactyl as a mystery that will be addressed in a bit. This leaves a clear picture of what a bird Pokemon may qualify as, but far less of what a wind Pokemon might be. Outside of having wings or fins in Gyarados' case, I think it's pretty easy to understand why both of these types may have felt irrelevant in the later builds of the game. The two types that overlap so heavily in theming and roster, why would the birds except Doduo perhaps be anything but wind? It only makes sense that they'd be merged. It is impossible to state confidently, but I imagine that the types also had an issue standing out on a battlefield. Why would a bird such as Articuno, which would likely not have been a proto-flying type, but instead of being a bird ice type, not be immune to ground type attacks like the bat Zubat? Would it not be weak to the same things that a flying bug might struggle with, such as a rock or, well, a giant thunderbolt? We will discuss the other culprit of similar theming later, but it's pretty fair of an explanation, I believe. This does not explain one thing, one very important thing. Was Golduck a bird type? Was it? It's the only bird not to be flying. It learns no moves that are either flying or would be proto-flying. I will explain later. I need answers. Answers, I say. So, how does all of this discussion on cut type explain the flying type, outside of being a bit of fun, strange trivia that a nerd would love? Well, it is because of the way the types were merged was in a way that is hard to define in any sense but baffling. Let's take a look at the moves in the game. The strongest flying move in the game includes Sky Attack, God Bird in Japanese, Drill Peck, and Mirror Move, Parrot Mimicry in Japanese, including lesser moves such as Peck. It's very clear that most, if not all, flying moves left in the game were bird type originally. The only two exceptions are Wing Attack and Fly. Now, Wing Attack is learned by Golbat, yes, but Fly is exclusive for the birds and Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl is an outlier for Sky Attack too, a very intentionally named move in Japanese, which raises the question of if it was planned to be a bird type from the start. Game Freak was a rather eclectic bunch of animal nerds after all. It could be that Aerodactyl was intentionally made to connect to the bird moves, as birds connect to dinosaurs historically. The fossil aside, none of the proto-flying mons learn any of these moves aside from Golbat's impressive wings, not even Fly, the near essential HM. Now, Generation 1 is no strange to making stab moves a privilege. Type is as much a defensive expression of game design as it is offensive. Plenty of people do not get access to impressive stab moves, and it's a discussion I hope to get into later, as flying is taking far too much time. But what is strange is that the likely former proto-flying moves are in the game. They do exist, they are just not flying type. Instead, they're normal. Gust, Razor Wind, and Whirlwind are all normal type in Generation 1, and while none are notably impressive, it would be far preferable to do nothing at all than for half the type up a creek and without a battle. Whirlwind is not so obviously named in Japanese, but is learned by exclusively flying type Pokemon and also Venomoth. Why did they do this? It's so strange to me. It tracks as well. Several non-birds learn Razor Wind and Whirlwind, but even weirder, only Pidgey learns Gust. My belief here is that it was to give Pidgey a starting move that had no super effectiveness on poor Bulbasaur, but still, it's strange. Flying does manage to have a bit of a thematic link to its current move selection, outside of being bird-themed. It's a type themed around turn order, which its two strongest attacking moves requiring a turn to pass before activating. Mirror Move is a counter-esque attack that copies opponents' move used last turn, and Razor Wind, while normal type, follows this as well. While an interesting thematic mechanic to theme a type around, it isn't so very strong or flashy, and it fails to impress in a multiplayer setting. There is no shock they dropped this one. Ultimately, however, I don't think the flying type is poorly implemented or designed. In fact, I think its interactions make it a very fun and powerful type in the game, one that feels unique in how it combats others, and even if flying lacks a defined personality, a lost sense of self stemming from a long and messy fusion. That will mark the end to my reading of this writing that I did. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. Unfortunately, I had to cut it off right before it got super exciting and super weird with types like Bug and Rock and fighting, but hopefully you can forgive me because it's already going pretty long. I would also like to say thank you for the opportunity of everything for this semester and to also like and subscribe. Have a nice night.